All right. All right. This is a political education session on the article that I wrote in October 2025 titled Memorializing a Neo-Nazi, the Commemoration of Charlie Kirk. This article was written just on the reflection of current events, the murder or death of Charlie Kirk that happened on September 10th, 2025, and was just a subject that was kept awash in the media. We heard various conservative, or what they call conservatives, basically these far-right elements, including a influential segment of the Republican Party and even Democrats, endorsing Charlie Kirk as a conservative hero, when in actuality he was a right-wing neo-Nazi racist, young racist, who was being used to galvanize and to give momentum, impetus to revitalizing a young current of neo-Nazi or right-wing elements across America in this period of just fascist revitalization, overt fascist revitalization. And there was really no real open critiques being made of Kirk, because anybody who came out criticizing his character, things that he had said himself, denouncing Black women as being ignorant or not intelligent, they basically making a variety of transphobic, racist, rightist sentiment out in the open publicly, and endorsing it through his Turning Point USA organization, was being promoted as, just valid, accepted dialogue, accepted political views in the mainstream. And he was being promoted by a lot of the established conservatives within the Republican Party as, somebody who was seen as an architect of building a strong movement on the right and building a strong base amongst racists, or they won't acknowledge him to be racist, but just a strong element across young whites in America. So observing this, I felt it was important to counter this trend of promoting this value system, Charlie Kirk as a hero of this value system, as something to be accepted in mainstream politics in America, revitalizing this whole racist current in America that has been held somewhat under wraps for the past several decades, since the 1960s era of the civil rights and Black liberation movements. And there was a need to counter this, to challenge this, to not allow it to just be given reign by default, with these right-wing elements suppressing, blackmailing, intimidating anybody who criticized Kirk, projecting them as being some sort of reverse racist, and just making anybody who was inclined to say anything that was honestly revelatory about the character and the politics of Charlie Kirk and his elements as being something problematic. They were just repressing that. So I felt it was necessary to give an objective analysis and voice to who he really was, the dangerous trends that he is trying to bring back to the surface in America as openly overt racist politics and fascist politics. So that is the light in which I brought this out and wrote this article. So that's what motivated this piece.
Thank you for sharing that, Rashid. Would you like to go ahead and start reading, and then I'll come in behind you?
Okay, will do. I would point out there are a couple of typos, I think, in the version that was circulated or transcribed out on the outside. So I would like to point out a couple of typos in the article, but I'll go ahead and start. For weeks now, the mainstream U.S. media has been awash with coverage and accolades about Charlie Kirk, a racist, ultra-white young fascist who was shot to death on September 10th, 2025. In this era of MAGA or Make America Great Again, glorification and promotion of traditional Nazi ideals, and shaming those who dare oppose them, Kirk is being hailed as a martyred young hero of the mainstream right, euphemistically called a conservative activist instead of the neo-Nazi that he was. There have been calls from modern conservatives for violent retaliation and repression of their political critics and opponents, whom they blame for creating the social climate that incited Kirk's killer.
Top U.S. officials attended and spoke at his memorial service, including President Donald Trump. He's being lionized as a hero of the Republicans, which reveals the true racist character of these U.S. power holders that they have hidden for decades behind a thin veil of tolerance. Republican Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin attended a gathering in memory of Kirk on September 25th, where he expressed that Kirk left a, quote, blueprint, end quote, for young conservatives to follow, and pledged $100,000 to Kirk's neo-Nazi Turning Point USA organization to set up chapters in Virginia. Kirk was the sanitized political version of Dylann Roof, the young white loner who shot 9 black parishioners to death in 2015 during a Bible study class in Charleston, South Carolina's Mother Emanuel Church. Kirk was, and now in death, far more dangerous. In truth, Kirk was and is now in death far more dangerous than Roof, because his agenda was and is being used to revitalize a culture from not so long ago where the majority of white America were people just like Dylann Roof, where America was a society where blacks weren't just murdered in their churches and homes, but entire white communities routinely gathered to carry out festive, gruesome murders, lynchings of blacks, and distributed their body parts, with a special emphasis on genitalia as mementos. And white mobs invaded and burned entire black communities to the ground while gang raping black girls and women and randomly killing blacks. This is the history that MAGA proponents and the Charlie Kirks are driving the movement to erase and remove from schools and libraries, in furtherance of their agendas to revive this history. Indeed, this is the very meaning of MAGA, Make America Great Again. Meaning, bring back that old, openly racist, sexist, white male supremacist America, where no one except the dominant white male class had a voice and power, and openly repressed and murdered those who even breathed a whisper of defiance. This is the quote, great, end quote, America they want to see, quote, again, end quote.
This whole anti-DEI movement is blatant white male supremacy writ large. This is only a new euphemism. In times past, they called it manifest destiny and mission civilisatris. That allows it to be promoted openly and to attack its critics as racist. The typical dysfunctional defense mechanism of deflection is now a conservative political strategy. In this moment of heroizing the slain neo-Nazi Kirk, not a word of criticism is being allowed to be uttered about him. Those who have simply posted or pointed to his own racist and sexist utterings and views have been fired from jobs, ridiculed in the press and social media, faced pressure from top power holders in the government, and have been used as heads on spikes dotting the landscape to warn others to keep quiet lest they suffer the same attacks for expressing free and honest speech. Yet these conservatives claim that Kirk embodied the ideals of free, open political debate and expression, and holding his views up against those of his opponents, so he should be emulated. His death is also being denounced by them as an evil act of political violence, which they claim to oppose. Yet they are openly repressing his critics. Wow.
I can continue. One wonders then, why am I now sitting and suffering abuses in the South Carolina prison system, including being held incommunicado in the immediate wake and response to publishing articles exposing abuses in VA prisons and its high-level administrators lying to the public to conceal those conditions? Not only was my transfer to South Carolina in retaliation for those articles and what is supposed to be protected free expression, but South Carolina prison officials have retaliated each time I've written anything critical about them. And they've been trying to murder me by medical/dental neglect, refusing and delaying me treatment for an abscessed tooth for several months now, and lying to cover up their actions. I've been a recognized political activist for decades and was profiled as a domestic terrorist by federal and Virginia agencies in 2009 because of their own statement that was written views, and my articles have often proven persuasive in educating the public and leading them to criticize the U.S. law enforcement and prison system and promoting a brotherhood of the oppressed philosophy. You want me to continue? So a neo-Nazi is a hero for espousing his views and challenging opponents, but I am a designated terrorist and face continued retaliation and censorship, including being targeted by the state with violence, political violence, for espousing my views and simply reporting the truth about the abuses suffered by America's prison or imprisoned, and holding my unifying political views up against the existing standards, excuse me, of the status quo, which has a tiny group of predatory rich excluding everyone else or exploiting everyone else. Clearly a racial and political double standard.
Thank you. Melinda, are you
I'm ready.
available to read?
I'm going to read now. How many of our independent Black leaders have suffered political persecution and violence and were murdered by the American government for using their tongues? Fred Hampton, George Jackson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and the list goes on. None of them were memorialized as with Kirk because they weren't white Nazis. In fact, they were the opponents of Nazism and were murdered for challenging America's white, racist, capitalist status quo. Indeed, the formal commemoration of their memories many years after their deaths, which the MAGA movement is trying to erase today, were the results of Black folks fighting for decades to have them remembered. In this period of the in this period of the resurgence of open and unapologetic white supremacy and the Nazification of America, they must invent heroes like Kirk, shielding and hiding his deviant views and pretending he was an innocent victim of some sinister killer. Kirk and his Turning Point USA group embodied propaganda and united to revive everything hateful that America was built upon and has stood for: genocide, white male supremacy, sexism, lynching, slavery, racial mass imprisonment, capitalism, and every form of di- divisionist, di- divide. Hold on, y'all. Now, form of
Divisiveness.
Divisiveness.
don't fuck with me. Just say it. And discrimination.
Divisiveness.
Yeah. And discrimination divisible to target and playing them against each other while trying to hide lies, red herrings, and mudslinging. This is the history of hate that the mega movement wants to erase while promoting a new generation of neo-Nazis like Kirk and Turning Point USA. We must expose them for what they are, fearlessly counter them, and stop their grabs for power. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people.
All right. With that reading, I would like to open the floor for discussion. I think there's a lot to address in this article and what it's speaking to, the situation, the present political climate that Charlie Kirk came to the fore in, and that he's being hailed as a hero in some sort of conservative martyr. And I think there's a lot to really flesh out if the folks on the call are interested in just presenting questions, critiques, dialogue, your thoughts on this article itself, and just in general the climate that this whole issue came to the fore in. So I'd like to open the floor to any response that folks on the call would like to give.
James, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add that Charlie Kirk was what is considered a stochastic terrorism, or terrorist rather. So stochastic terrorism is like not somebody who directly does domestic terrorist acts like violence against other people, but they incentivize those acts against groups of people that they find they don't like. So Charlie Kirk was one of those people that largely influenced the people that went to that movie theater to shoot people when they're watching, what was it, Batman, I think. And then there's also people like Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro, who are also stochastic terrorists.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And these are the people who are, because they don't explicitly make calls to violence, they don't openly tell people to go and kill or lynch or physically attack people who are members of marginalized groups or groups who are portrayed or have been portrayed historically as racial inferiors or attacked because of their gender or gender orientation, that sort of thing. They are validated as, a legitimate voice in a movement that is simply, as it's portrayed today, exercising their rights to free expression, free speech. When indeed they are people who are inciting, galvanizing, and whipping up racial, sexist, jingoist, ultra-nationalist hatred and reaction against people who are being scapegoated as the cause of, the economic decline and degradation in America, social and cultural degradation, the loss of social morals and morals, and they are being used to promote, this prevalence now of Christo fascist values, and the attack is that those who would stand up to them or who would resist them or who would challenge those who act based on their attacks and their dog whistles against those that they rile up are themselves racist. They are themselves the ones to be repressed and to be quiet, silenced. So yeah, you're exactly right. That's the exact type of breed that these Charlie Kirks and Tucker Carlsons are, and they are a strong element in this revitalization of far-right values that has been the undercurrent of America, since its founding, but since the development of racist politics, in the late 1600s.
If nobody has anything to add to that, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, someone shared with me a website, charliequotes.com, and it's just a bunch of quotes of his that are, sourced and linked to the source. But you can search just by word on this website. And so I just typed in white, and it's dozens and dozens of quotes of him promoting white replacement theory and promoting racial fear and racial hate. And he really was telling people, young men and women, boys sometimes, often, right? We're at war. There's a war on white people, and it's being run by the Democrats. It's really dangerous shit.
Right. And not to mention, there's also at Turning Points events and also was it CPUSA? Is that the one? Or no, CPAC, that's the one. They have a lot of Nazi imagery. Like I remember one of the events specifically, they had the Om Rune as like the stage, which is very much like a straight up Nazi dog whistle. And the quote unquote Roman salutes, which are uh, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there isn't really any evidence of them actually being used by Romans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree. The question is, how do and what we must do to counter these sorts of these value systems, and now the normalization of overt racism. Whereas, since the 60s, since the era of the national liberation struggles across the third world and black liberation and civil rights movements here in America, overt racism was suppressed. It was pushed as to become an undercurrent, and racist politics have always been the undercurrent in America. But following that period, it had to be done sneakily and as a hidden, unintentional behavior in society of America, although it was promoted by the rightist and the establishment. Now it's being brought back out into the open. Now it's okay to openly suppress the achievements of people of color, to attack people with transphobic politics and attack women, to attack people of color in general, the jingoist attack against migrants, and like Conrad pointed out, this white replacement theory that the whites are being overrun and that white males are now a minority and in danger, and they are now the victims of racial oppression or unfair disadvantage at the hands of people of color. So that now the gains that were made or that were nominally made under affirmative action and some of the civil rights legislation, Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65, are now seen or portrayed as an attack on inclusion of whites. So it gained an unfair advantage to people of color, so that now the achievements of people of color are being portrayed as only gained because they were given an unfair edge under these, civil rights laws and policies that were established during the civil rights era, which is in essence an attack on the achievements of people of color as having been unworthy gains that they didn't achieve because of their merit, or they didn't have the skill sets, they didn't have the aptitudes to actually accomplish what they've accomplished, which is basically saying that we are inferior. And the only reason we have gained certain statuses or certain gains politically, economically, culturally, et cetera, in American society is because we were given an unfair advantage under laws that were passed back in the 60s. So now the counter game is being played that they're repressing what is called, the whole DEI thing, diversity, equality, inclusion. So anything that promotes diversifying society, giving equality to women, people of marginalized gender, people of color, and inclusion of these people is an unfair disadvantage to white males, and rich white males in particular. And this is something that we have to counter. We have to fearlessly expose, critique, challenge, and bring the masses out in being educated, organized, and are agitating against this whole right-wing movement, which is nothing but a repackaging of Nazi politics.
I was thinking about like why now? Like why, since I guess really, like definitely since Trump's first campaign, but even like leading up to that, like what, like just kind of trying to periodize it and think about, because I guess what I'm getting at is it feels like an admission of sorts by the empire that the like liberalism and neoliberalism didn't work, right? It's like there's like an imperial anxiety and like if they're declining in their power overall over the world economy and their stature and so on, right? It's like I guess what I'm trying to do is locate a material basis for this reversal of what you call elsewhere the move from sneaky to open racism, right? And trying to like situate that within the last decade and a half, couple decades of what's been going on. Does that spark anything for anybody?
Yeah. I was thinking that has something to do with capital being so consolidated at this point, where it's really hard for them to roll back to a more acceptable, quote unquote, liberal Western democracy, because the illusion of fairness has sort of shattered for so many people that they are now just moving forward with restructuring the economy towards like open slavery. And like while we had slavery before in the form of like the prison industrial complex, it's becoming much more open to the public eye in the form of like ICE, just like mass abducting people.
I think it's very clearly this era of the resurgence of overt racism, overt fascism, is very clearly tied to economic instability on the world stage for the United States and the ruling class, the imperialist ruling class in America. They're being challenged for economic dominance, global dominance by the BRIC countries, specifically led by China in telecommunications and technology. America wants to retain this global hegemony as a central power with its power based in fossil fuel, control and domination of world fossil fuel supplies. So if we go back and look at what has happened since the 70s, the 60s and 70s, when the Middle East was able to destabilize the world fossil fuel access, destabilize America's control through setting up or deliberately manipulating the flow of access to oil and being able to cut off or create artificial shortages of access to oil, which OPEC did back in the 70s. America has been trying since that era to gain control and dominance over the world oil supplies and world fossil fuel supplies in general, including natural gas. And America was never a fossil fuel producer itself, but it always had sought since the mid 20th century to control the oil supplies and to gain global dominance over that, because all industrial societies are basically fueled and controlled by access to oil and natural gas. And this is why if we see America has been trying to repress China in its efforts to diversify fuel sources to sustainable fuel sources like nuclear power, wind power, solar power. America has been trying to counter that and undermine the technological advances of China and just shifting the world's fuel supplies or the world's energy supplies over to sustainable energy sources, because they want to keep control of or keep the world's fuel sources predominantly based in natural gas and oil or fossil fuels. And if we look a few decades ago, America started its fracking, producing oil from shale, and from doing that and basically destabilizing a lot of the land out in the South, the Midwest and South, particularly Oklahoma, in that region, they have went from depending on oil access from the Middle East primarily to being able to then produce its own oil and thereby gaining the advantage of becoming an oil producer. And it has basically refused to endorse shutting down, coal production or extracting coal, etc., which we all know there's been a trend internationally to, at least in a nominal way, control or reduce fossil fuel production as, a danger to global and climate change. And America has been fighting to, particularly these right-wing elements whose economic base is in fossil fuel production, to keep fossil fuel as a main fuel source and to tie the U.S. dollar to the fossil fuel market. With the prevalence or the challenge from China and other tech-centered societies or tech-centered economies challenging this oil-based and natural gas-based economy, America has been fighting back and striking back to force a dependence on these fossil fuel supplies. And in doing that, it has had to create conditions where Americans will allow a lot of reactionary policies, that is, to stop protests or challenges to fossil fuel production and out of the concern for, trying to bring or contain global warming, climate change. They've had to institute reactionary policies that work against the health interests of the society. They have had to create a reactionary base of the population that would endorse these types of policies as opposed to policies that promote diversifying or continue to diversify the tech industries or tech advancement and technological research and development based in America, which would, continue to enhance reverting to a more technical-based and alternative fuel-based economy. So a lot of this is oriented toward whipping up a reactionary element in America that would just back policies that these reactionary power holders want to push that the typical America is not going to endorse. And gaining control over oil supplies in other countries, engaging in wars that Americans have deemed unpopular since Vietnam. So they've had to rip up a racial undercurrent and whip this up to have people, as the conservative base in America, back policies that have really worked against their interests. And the only way that they've really been able to do that is to play up racial divisions and to scapegoat, marginalized people of color, marginalized gender people, women, as the cause of economic instability, policies that work against the interests of, America at large. So this is what I see as being the resurgence or the base for the resurgence of reactionary politics based in racism, gender repression, people of, non-conforming gender orientation, repression of them, just scapegoating people and militarizing America, militarizing the police so that they can push these economic agendas that the masses would otherwise oppose and unify in resistance.
You know what? I think, that is largely it. You nail on the head a moment ago. The purpose of Charlie Kirk and others like him is to generate and maintain and reproduce a base of voters who will support all of these increasing wars of aggression and even just the hybrid warfare policies that don't rise to the level of kinetic warfare, the sanctions and for it to just be common and normal for decades for the U.S. to justify strangling Cuba, because Cuba bad, and now, of course, that's one of the things that we're seeing Trump escalate on is strangling Cuba and using access to oil and gas, and saying anybody who trades with them you know, is a no-go for docking your port in the U.S. We're not having it. And so he's like, has kept everybody away, almost everybody away. Just a few days ago, I guess, Russia delivered a shitload of crude oil, but it's not enough, and it's not gas. And yeah, so it's really messed up there right now. But, you know, I think that's a central element, I think, that doesn't get discussed a lot in like, you know, electoral politics discussions, is largely because the Democrat base is also whipping its people for, you know, support for geopolitical agenda, right? You know, but there have even been some videos and like analyses that have shown that Charlie Kirk was becoming more critical of Israel in his final months, and he was openly against going to war with Iran. We know that too. And so it's like, once he was not doing what his role was designed to do reliably, once he started asking questions and pushing back, and then like talking about it, you know, because he himself put out videos where he said, like, I was pressured to stop asking questions about Israel, and it makes me just want to keep digging, you know. And that was like a month before he was killed, you know. And so I think his death specifically was tied up in geopolitical intrigue, most likely, and that makes it doubly relevant, you know, just seeing what the role of a fascist populist is, you know. And he was going to college campuses, right, and trying to, you know, really lay claim on people's minds when they're young.
Yeah. And of course, they're going to portray him in the light that serves the interest of these right-wing, ultra-right-wing power holders and their conservative values and their divisive values of playing various sectors of the population against each other to blame marginalized people, whether you're talking about migrants, whether you're talking about blacks, whether you're talking about women, whether you're talking about people of marginalized gender orientations. They play the divide and conquer game. And that's what they're doing now. They're shifting people's attention away from, basically, they're cannibalizing the whole federal government and the economy. They are attacking and destroying the little bit of social safety net that was created during the liberal era in response to the resistance going on in the 60s and 70s. And they're shifting all of that spending back to the main centers of power and wealth in America, which is, you know, rooted primarily through the Pentagon. So you have a massive amount of contracts, the money that was going to parts of the government that were in certain ways upholding and protecting the interest of some segments of workers, some segments of disabled people through Medicaid, and other components of the economy are being basically deconstructed, and the wealth that was going to those sectors of the economy is now being rerouted into the major corporate centers of the economy, which is rooted primarily through the Pentagon, through military spending. So you have the enhancement of military activity, the increase in the incentivizing other countries, which Trump did through NATO, to pressure them to do more military spending, buying more military hardware from America. All of this wealth is going or being rerouted from the segments of society who need economic benefits and support, who need what they call the welfare state. They're destroying those aspects of the economy that were given some concessions under the liberal era of the 60s and 70s and the neoliberal era. And now this wealth is being more openly concentrated into the hands of the billionaires and the billionaire corporations centered in the Pentagon and tech industries and the fossil fuel production and distribution, these sectors of the economy. And what you see very clearly is the re-incitement of racial division, political division, gender division, to keep people distracted, looking at others as scapegoats for economic chaos that they're creating in efforts to centralize and to, redistribute wealth back to the centers of the economy where the billionaires are rooted and based, and more away from the federal government and away from sectors of society that need, financial support and economic aid.
I have a question for anybody who hasn't spoken much yet, especially anybody who's been involved in the UPROAR work over the last few months. If reading about the way they, and remembering about, because it was all over the media, right? Thinking about the way that Charlie Kirk was treated, what kind of parallels do you draw between that and Officer Jeremy Hall that was killed at River North last year?
I am not familiar with this. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah,
That was a
Tiny.
right?
You're breaking up. We can't really understand you. That's James.
Miss Tiny, are you on?
Yes, I am. Epic
Brother,
greetings, everyone.
be light. I just. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Hello, all powerful people.
Miss Tiny, did you want
I'd
to
like to respond to.
Oh, so sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say.
Oh, no, I was just going to respond to your question.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Basically, you can clearly see the same tactic at play. Jeremy Hall was a guard who was killed last year at River North Correctional Center, SIC, in Virginia. Jeremy Hall was widely known across the prison population as one of the most abusive guards at River North. He was known for shooting prisoners in the face with guns posted in the housing units in the prison. He was known for abusing the disciplinary process, having written dozens of charges against prisoners, and acting out his own personal animus toward prisoners. He was known to be verbally abusive, a very blatantly racist, abusive guard at the institution. And he was killed. He was stabbed, and two other guards were involved in also being stabbed, but he was stabbed to death. And in the wake of his death, Virginia Department of Correction portrayed him as, some great heroized guard who was martyred, doing his job. He was some, upstanding professional, this, that, and the third. But he was actually one of the most abusive, racist guards at the prison, who was known across the prisoner population for his abuses. And the prisoner who was accused of his death actually called into UPROAR. He gave a recorded statement of his own. He voluntarily gave a statement. He had been brutalized by the guards in the wake of the incident. He'd been beaten, several bones broken, held in isolation. But he admitted that he stabbed his guard to death because he had grown tired of his abuses. He had grown tired of the open practice of beating prisoners, prisoners being killed in these prisons, in Virginia prisons, or several of which cases have now been brought to the fore and are now in the media because of the work of UPROAR and some of the people on this call now as advocates for some of the families of these slain prisoners in the prison system whose deaths have now been ruled homicides, and they're now being publicized widely in the media. But he had admitted he had killed the guard. He had just grown tired of living in and watching other prisoners live in terror of these guards just arbitrarily beating prisoners, shooting prisoners, abusing their power, abusing the weapons that they have, terrorizing prisoners. And he acknowledged that, he accepted the consequences of his choice in doing that. but this guard is being portrayed as a hero, somebody to be emulated, looked up to, lionized, and respected, when actually he was just a symbol of the sort of racial polarization that exists out in the southwestern Virginia prisons, these predominantly or almost totally white staff prisons, where they are deliberately housing almost totally black and brown prisoners who are being subjected to cultural and racial abuse and persecution, random brutality, frequent abuse, racism, racial degradation. They're being just constantly called racist names, and subjected to abuses that the public generally doesn't know anything about, and that we've been bringing out. But yeah, it's almost an exact use of the same tactic in heroizing Charlie Kirk, somebody who was a blatant racist, a blatant Nazi, as some sort of hero to be lionized while covering up and hiding and repressing those who speak out against what his real character and his real values and what he was teaching really entailed.
There's an MSN article I've got pulled up on the screen, and it's CO Jeremy Lewis Hall remembered after deadly inmate attack. And this is a national, outlet, and it opens with a Virginia corrections officer killed in a violent attack inside River North Correctional Center is being remembered as a devoted husband, a proud public safety professional, and a man whose loss has shaken a community.
That almost sounds like the exact same thing he was saying about Charlie Kirk. He was a devoted husband, a Christian martyr, somebody who embodied conservative ideals and promoted the rights to free speech. Yeah, the same attempt to lionize him. He was really just somebody to be rejected, critiqued, and his ideas, exposed and criticized.
I think it's also interesting to note the consistency of the messing around Charlie Kirk. And I mean, these people are largely class conscious, right? So I know it's an interest to evangelize that. Like a lot of the people,
breaking up real bad. Breaking up real bad.
Fix it.
You might want to try to check your connection or something. You breaking up real bad. Can't
yeah,
I'll what you're saying. There you hold on.
Melinda, you've been quiet today. Did you want to share any thoughts on the article or on the discussion so far?
Nope. I'm just listening.
Nice.
Welcome
back, James.
Do y'all know what happened to the person that killed the correctional officer?
It's been a while since we've spoken with him. Last we knew, he was in Red Onion. I'm not sure if he's been given a tablet or not. It's worth reaching out to him. But we do know that he was beaten severely, really badly, and he was, tortured in several ways. They were fucking with his food, and being really cruel, as like payback. And yeah, he's alive, and we'll be publishing some of his writings and some of his audio soon.
How do I sound now?
Better.
Is it right? Okay. I was just saying that it's interesting to note that these individuals in Charlie Kirk's circle are largely class conscious, right? So they know it's in their interest to evangelize him post death. However, there's The public largely seems to be aware of the lack of any genuine concern or grief amongst his inner circle. Like, for example, I think if I'm not mistaken, Steven Crowder, who was at the time like the number two conservative podcaster, I think it was the day after or sometime like shortly within that week, he had changed his bio to the number one conservative podcast after Charlie Kirk's death. So yeah, they don't really care about each other.
It's wild too because he changed it himself in his own bio. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I think what's
Um,
important. Oh, what, Evie? What are you gonna say?
no, please go ahead, Levi.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I think something that doesn't come up much in this conversation that, like, I think is really important is that, like, people like Charlie Kirk and Steven Crowder and Tucker Carlson and all those people, like, even if they do actually believe the things that they believe, there is like a
We have
financial
60 seconds remaining.
there is a financial incentive to like being right wing and being like as like right wing and crazy as possible. So it's like I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it's like these people are not real people. Like these people, it's their jobs to pretty much lie to people and make shit up because
Yeah,
there
they're
is a
all
financial
opportunists.
incentive. Yeah, they're opportunists. So it's like I don't know. I don't know. That's all I have to say about that.
That's just the like a glaring highlight of the contradictions of capitalism.
Exactly. But like I always think like obviously the people that we should educate everybody, right? But like when Mao talks about like the three types of like working class people, like there's the advanced working class and I think it was like the immediate working class and then like the backward working class. Where like the advanced working class are the people who are like the organizers, like people who are really like revolutionaries, and then there's like the intermediate. I don't think it's intermediate. I think there's another term for it, but like those people are the people who are like sympathetic, who are like supporters. You know, they volunteer, they'll come out, but they may not be a leader. And then there's the backwards working class, which are like the conservatives. Not all lumpen, but a lot of the lumpen proletariat. And those people, you know, they should also be included and
All
like
power to the people.
yeah, all power to the people,
Well,
but like all like educated and things like that, and we should be trying to push those people towards more of the immediate and yeah, and towards the advanced. But it's like reaching conservatives like who who like who consume that type of media and like trying to reach them and get their understanding is I don't know. I think that's a battle that
it's
that I
certainly a
don't know.
Sisyphean task.
Yeah, it's necessary, but I don't know how to go about it, you know? Because it's like a lot of the things that Charlie Kirk and these people say are just so absurd. And it's like literally just like educating yourself and knowing how the world works will just like be like, okay, this is ridiculous. I don't believe this. But that's like not enough for some people. But yeah.
I'm of the mindset there are some people you can't reach, or you specifically, like you, the individual that is trying to change their mind, will not be able to do so in any way. Like you're just not the right person and you don't have the right equipment for it.
So like then I'm like, who does and you know how, right? Like and specifically thinking about the uproar work. You know, if we want to shut down Red Onion and Wallens Ridge, we're going to need support from almost everybody. You know.
Hmm.
And so it's a concrete problem for us. those specific very backwards people, you know, and not the guards themselves necessarily, although that's part of it, but that's not the topic of like what we're talking about at this moment. You know, but just like the other people scattered throughout that region who have more of a knee-jerk affinity with Charlie Kirk and Jeremy Hall than anything else, you know. And there are definitely people who are hostile and fascist themselves who can't be organized with and shouldn't be organized with. But I think there are a lot of just undeveloped people who are swimming in all of that propaganda and nothing else. But I mean, it needs to, whatever, you know, it will need to be tactical unity around specific targeted shared goals and nothing more or less, you know. But through that process, hopefully, like teaching and learning, you know.
Yeah, I think to your question, like how do we reach those people? Like while we might not be the individual that can reach them directly, I think it is certainly within reason that there is somebody in their circle somewhere that is within reach. And we might not directly know who those people are, but if we can reach those people by happenstance, just, you know, having reached out to people, we might be able to like and capture those individuals, and then those individuals go on doing the work that we couldn't accomplish ourselves.
Yeah, I'm like,
I don't think it's really that difficult to reach those people. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't really think it's that difficult to reach those people, particularly when you look at where Rawlins Ridge and Red Onion are located. These are rural, poor communities. And a lot of the policies that are being pushed on these communities by these conservatives are appealing to a racial undercurrent that is common in these rural communities. But at the same time, these communities are deprived. These communities are being neglected and pretty much marginalized by the government. So the same sorts of programs that we implement or our party's line through revolutionary intercommunalism in poor urban communities can be brought to these poor rural communities too, these trailer parks, these poor rural mountain communities across Appalachia. You bring a party organization like ours, but you mobilize elements from these poor rural communities, whites who understand the political line, and they implement programs that meet the needs of these poor rural communities. It's like the Serve the People programs that we're implementing in the urban communities. You reach the people by addressing their immediate needs that the government is not reaching and not meeting. And this will incentivize them to want to know who you are, why you're doing this, and to learn what are the values and views that underlie an organization and a people who come together to serve their communities without any strings attached. And this is what the original Panthers did. And this is why they became wildly popular and still remain one of the leading elements or leading organizations that are still emulated today in, you know, the urban Black communities, because they created programs that reached a particularly reactionary, a particularly competitive, largely lumpenized community, of a community who had been basically corrupted by the values of the criminal mentality that had been projected onto them through the entertainment industry, etc. And they were shown through cooperation under the leadership of the Panthers that they could meet their own needs, and that the Panthers were oriented toward serving the needs that the government would not meet. The government basically refused to meet when they went pleading, you know, week after week to their local community councils, the government agencies, the legislators. They showed them how to meet their own needs, and through serving, you know, free food to the children, free groceries, free senior citizen escorts to get their Social Security checks and to cash their checks, and free ambulance and medical services, free groceries in the communities. They show the communities that we're here to serve your needs, that the government is not. So they became a respected, a valued servant to the community, and through that, they were able to teach them their politics. Alongside these community service programs, which were not charities, but were teaching the community how to become self-sufficient, they were also politically educating them. And you could do the same thing in these rural communities. You know, that's why we created the arm within our party, you know, the White Panther organization, to develop cadre of whites to go into these poor rural white communities, create serve the people programs there, and at the same time politically educate them, organize them around community survival, community needs, and at the same time politically educate them, teach them what the government is doing and why they're doing it, the ruling class, their divisive policies, the policies that do not have these people's interests at heart at all, but are just using them as a political base to back their reactionary policies that are just enriching them and depriving these poor rural and working class people of what they need to survive. So I don't really think it's hard at all to reach these people. It's pulling together the elements to create the cadre to go into the communities and do the work.
That's great. That's a great points you made. So I'm thinking about, you know, specifically again the shutdown Red Onion and Wallens Ridge, and we've chewed on this a little bit before, but it basically would require replacing those jobs with something as good or better, but something that is actually not like a resource suck on the community, but something that actually benefits people. So it's like a bit of a macro, you know, it's like what actually would be better for a prison that the people there would like benefit from and get on board with, you know, and then how do we build support for that, right? I think one of the answers might be bringing in what you were just talking about, right? These serve the people programs and bringing in the question specifically of labor and production and worker dignity and, you know, how they treat the employees, but, you know, mainly how they treat the prisoners, right? But like, you know, showing, and I'm sure that they know that it's bad for the community to have those prisons there. I'm sure they've seen an increase in things like domestic violence and things like that since the prisons started, you know, being in that area. So, yeah, I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a micro and macro relationship there, where we're not going to be able to make that systemic change and shut those prisons down without those folks being on board. And one of the ways to possibly to get them on board is through serve the people programs that also educate on that systemic issue.
Yep, and you also create an alternative economic base in those programs that teach the communities how to become self-sufficient economically, so that they aren't looking to the establishment and the government to create jobs or to depend on them for jobs production. And this is why you have these promoting these racist elements like Charlie Kirk, so that they can continue to revitalize and root these reactionary politics in communities like that, to keep them from organizing around understanding that it's the establishment that creates racial divisions, it's the establishment that profits from racial division, is the establishment that rules and consolidates and keeps its power by playing the masses against each other, instead of them being organized and united to understand that their interests are not being promoted by these conservatives or the Democrats, that their interests can only be promoted by unifying them as workers, unifying them as marginalized, oppressed, poor people, and them seizing control of the economic base of society, the political systems of society, and wielding them to their own benefit and based on their own interests, serving their own needs, collective needs, that is. So this is exactly why you have politics like those promoted by Charlie Kirk amongst these poor rural white and some, poor Midwestern white and, the large base of white communities, so that they are focused on division against other people because of the color of their skin or because they're so-called migrants or what have you, into things that in no way serve them, in no way benefit them, away from things or organizing around things and policies and programs that would serve and benefit them, which would necessitate them unifying with other oppressed sectors of society and workers, across the, society in general and globally. So this is why people like Charlie Kirk and their politics are promoted also, is to just create that undercurrent of division and mobilizing people to support political agendas, economic agendas that work actually against their own interests.
Yeah, those prisons being there in the first place and the lobbying they did in the community to get them placed there is a good example of exactly that, I think. And many people on the call have probably seen it, but I'm sure not everyone has. On YouTube, there's a documentary called Up the Ridge, and it talks a little bit about the development process of Wallens Ridge State Prison. And then it talks about, and Rashid has written about this as well, the abuses that went on there that prompted international attention and organizing among loved ones on the outside in Virginia and in Connecticut, where like Interstate Corrections Compact was sending, Connecticut was sending prisoners to Virginia through the ICC, and multiple of them ended up dying in Virginia custody. And yeah, so Up the Ridge chronicles all of that, but they do talk a little bit about, they had like a town meeting that was totally like engineered and you could see it, and they showed footage from being at a convention that sells prison, like, everything, sinks, everything, and it talked a little bit about that economic angle. It used to be coal country, and much of the coal extraction went overseas because it's cheaper and it's closer to the places that they have in other countries, yet other countries, to do the refining. So that's like, to bring back the global perspective, that decline, if now we're seeing all of this, the resurgence of fascism, or like more openly fascistic behaviors and ideologies, and like the active spreading of them, and the like backed by huge financial backers like Turning Point USA, we're looking at that as a symptom of like the empire in decline and like trying to maintain its grip. Then it locating the prisons, the supermax prisons within Virginia, and why they were put there in the first place, and their relationship to the export of capital from the U.S. abroad, and the export of jobs with it, in tandem with just technology laying people off, because that's a major thing too. It's not just export. Yeah, but it's like the chickens are coming home to roost kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and I think overt racism, and it's being promoted openly, is a sign of desperation and decadence in the imperialist ruling class and its control over, the world economic system. Fascism, racism, practice more out in the open when it becomes more desperate. Whereas you have liberal reforms kick in when they have the resources to draw on, and when the masses become more educated and oriented toward mass resistance, and they have to make concessions to the people who begin to consolidate, as happened here in the 60s and 70s, across various sectors that were marginalized and oppressed, from blacks to natives to Asians to migrants, women, oppressed, marginalized gender people, students. All of these elements were coming together in a more consolidated resistance against the establishment and the concentration of wealth amongst these capitalist imperialists. And that's why they made the concessions they did back in the 60s and 70s. They created the safety nets and the incentives to buy off certain sectors of the population, and to implement certain liberal reforms to create more what they call welfare state benefits to poor people, to working people, to marginalized people. And as the people were systematically moved away from the mass consciousness, the working class consciousness, and became more focused in reaction, more reactionary behavior, lumpen behavior, at the base amongst the poor, the less we became educated and conscious of the oppressed system, the more the system saw that it could revert back to concentrating wealth back into the hands of the capitalist group and imperialist class, and to roll back the safety net that money and taxpayer money was being funneled into, and to reshift that wealth back to the corporate sector. And again, there's the economic instability and desperation that they're trying to, basically shift mass attention away from, through focusing the people's consciousness on, scapegoats and red herrings, and, basically blaming marginalized people for economic policies that they have nothing to do with. So it's basically tactics of divide and conquer.
Yep. So it's 5:23, y'all. We've got 7 minutes till we hit our 90-minute mark. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts they'd like to share on the piece, if you haven't gotten to the chance yet?
Evie, I didn't know you mentioned somebody from the family of Michael Haley might be on the call. I'm going to send you, Aubrey McKay's family would like to speak with them. But I'm going to send you the number of the aunt to pass along to them.
Okay, they didn't hop on, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
Let's talk after the call. Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Yeah, anybody else like to offer any thoughts or critiques or questions or any suggestions in relation to the article or what we've been talking about? All right. I guess with that, we can wrap this session up. Definitely appreciate everybody who sat in, participated, listened in, and hope we're able to gain some valuable thoughts and ideas for organizing and moving forward in the work that we're doing from this, and these ideas and thoughts that were, circulated during this session. So with that, I appreciate everybody's appearance and participation. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Power to the people.